Podcasters Roundtable, round 81. Podcasting is part of your business. That's where we're going to start, at least. We'll see where it goes. That is the goal here. If you want to join the roundtable, if you actually want to be on a roundtable, podcastersroundtable.com/guest. We'll get you on the list. You can submit whatever it is that you'd want to talk about, to discuss, to be the diving board, which we jump into the pool and then just go crazy. We usually stay mostly on topic, which, for me is a little disappointing. Let's get off topic. But no, everyone does a great job here. So sign up. We need you to join the roundtable. If you're a podcaster, every single podcaster in the world needs to be on the show. You got to have goals, right? But yeah, this is not podcasting as your business. More like using podcasting as part of your business. And I think we'll find out. A very small roundtable today. Dave, I think, is out at PodFest DC. So Dave, have fun out there, buddy. And we'll see you on the next one. But let's meet the roundtablers that we do have today, starting with co-host Daniel J. Lewis.
Thank you very much. Podcasting is part of my business, and my business exists because of my podcast.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, that's what I thought. So that was another reason Chris was asking me, how did I land on this topic? And I said, well, partly because of your YouTube channel and your podcast. Seemed like it was in his wheelhouse, partly from the topics he submitted at podcasterroundtable.com/guest, and partly because I knew Daniel had tie-in as well. Or I'm pretty sure he mentioned it plenty of times before, that podcasting is part of your business, not necessarily the business. So, Chris, welcome to the roundtable.
Thank you, Ray. For podcasting, podcasting is just a medium for me. I mean, but that's one of many mediums, and podcasting certainly an enjoyable one. But when it comes to business, it's kind of, the world's completely at your fingertips. What medium are you going to choose? And podcasting can certainly be an effective one.
Cool. And yeah, I mean, it's a good place to start. I mean, let's talk about, so I mentioned not podcasting as a business. So there are, obviously this is a podcast pretty much about podcasting. So we talk to a lot of people who have a podcast and then they've turned that into some type of business. Or, I mean, it's a weird line, right? I mean, if you're a podcaster and I guess what, you do ads and that's the only income you have, then I guess the podcast is your business. But really, once you start doing something outside it, maybe you have a service like consulting. Daniel's done consulting, I've done consulting. Then which one is it? Is the podcast the business, or the consulting is the business and the podcast is the marketing arm? I don't know. What do you guys think? What's the difference between podcast for your business or as a business?
I think it ties to, what is the money coming from actually? Is it from the podcast? Like, is your podcast sponsored? And that's what you do to generate the money. And so you release an episode, you get paid. And maybe it's from sponsorships or affiliates, but basically it is that episode that directly makes money. I think that is then the podcast is being a business on its own. The other way would be the podcast supports the business in some way, which is what I do.
I agree. I mean, and that support can be very little or quite a bit, depending on what it is you're actually doing in your business. If it's, audio, video, or even podcast consulting, each piece that you're talking about can be a product per se, or the fact that you're actually doing it, talking about podcasting, you're ultimately in a service of podcasting. So, if it's sponsorships, or if you're being paid, meaning it's your full-time job to do podcasting, then yes, podcasting is your business. But then, I come from the opposite spectrum here. I'm no way, in any way, shape, or form, a podcast expert. I'm a peon among gods right now, sitting here. And so, I mean, most of the things that we talked about even before the show, you're talking about, different audio types and everything. It's just going way over my head. I understand MP3, I understand MP4, which is not even an audio file. But yeah. I mean, for me, podcasting is a vehicle for me to populate ideas and get it to somebody who can then consume it. So whether it's, video or an article written or on a web page. If it's in the audio format, if it's finally, where does that end? That's kind of where I come from. What's the best way to get it to who I need it to get to?
Hey, Chris, what is your business?
My business is actually Meteorite. Probably can see the logo right here above my shoulder on my jacket. But it's basically a small business digital marketing company, and we help businesses understand their digital marketing, how to use it more effectively, and then we spend a lot of time in digital commerce. So there are topics that come up or conversations that, what is podcasting? How can I use podcasting? And in my area, that's starting to happen. You're starting to see more and more podcasts.
I was going to say, yeah. Is it? Do you encourage businesses that you consult with to start a podcast, or when do you encourage them to start a podcast?
Well, if they're tech savvy enough to do so, then I can encourage it. But oftentimes, what they'll want to do is go to video right away. Because they're used to watching videos for the most part. And then they want to go to podcast because they want to recycle the content from the video.
Which, I mean, do you think that's a good way to do it? And do you want to recycle the content? Is that the best way to get into a podcast?
For small business owners, it probably is, because what happens is they can see themselves on screen and they get more comfortable with who they are. And once they're comfortable with who they are, they can take away that visual of seeing themselves actually do it. And then they can start to imagine the audience that's there and listening to them. And so I think it's a good transition from being able to see yourself perform, then go on to doing it audio only. Because once it's audio only, they're not sure where to look. They get more caught up into how I sound and those sorts of things, instead of taking the concern off of the sound coming out of their mouth versus what they're seeing on the screen. They're more focused on that, and it comes out more naturally, I think.
Daniel, you had a business before you had a podcast.
Yes, but I wasn't pursuing that business seriously and not as a full-time. It was my podcast that inspired making my business my full-time business. I started podcasting when I was still working for another company, well, a nonprofit organization. And it was when I launched the Audacity to Podcast, my third podcast, and seeing the reception from that and seeing a lot of people asking for help that I realized I could provide and, in a sense, help I could sell. That's when I realized this is that missing piece to launch the business that I've been thinking of launching for a while. And the podcast enabled that to happen.
Yeah, John Moore in the chat, he says he's in the process of selling his employer on the need of a podcast. It seems a no-brainer in his industry, which is disability support. Do you guys, I mean, have you ever had that conversation? Chris, how's that conversation go when you're saying, hey, you should add podcast to your digital marketing plan? People say, a what?
Well, I would say it does help when it happens internally first. If there's somebody within the company that's interested in taking on the podcast, then it's a much easier transition. And honestly, I think it goes farther for the business too, because there's somebody inside the company who can spearhead it, who knows what they want to talk about, the content that needs to be delivered. That seems to be the most effective way to do it.
And
now, Ray, for you,
yeah,
you are in the podcasting business, but not in the sense that many people think. You don't sell your own podcast. You don't podcast consult anymore. When you were approached by the company you work for, like, did they already have podcasts, or did they come to you? What was the story there?
Yeah, the organization I work for they had a show. They had a network of shows that they had started a couple of years prior, and it was just doing so well that they needed help. They had one guy doing it, right? And in fact, I think you find a lot of companies who may just give it to somebody as a side job. At least my organization had one person dedicated to it. Well, actually, to be honest with you, I think his job was something else that he then added it in, and it became almost his primary job. But they added me in. They were, he was forward looking enough to see that he needed someone who spoke the language of podcasting. So in that case, because it was such early days, that was 2008 when I started working there, still pretty early. It was fortunate that they knew the value in getting someone who understood the space. So that's how I got into it. I produced for them, and everything on the side, well, this episode is brought to you by the Bay Bridge. No, it's not actually sponsored. There's no sponsors in this one. You're right. I typically don't do it. I'll dabble in business things like consulting, stuff like that, to see what it's like to work for yourself. But yeah, they went out and found somebody essentially, but they had already had a podcast. They were exploring it. It really was kind of like a side project that I think really only until the last couple of years have they wrapped into the big overall brand and said, hey, wow, this is, you guys were doing some really cool stuff. Let's make sure that the brand is associated with that. So
now, did they have a marketing strategy in place for that? Or was it more of we've started something and now it's taking off and now we really have to feed the beast or we're going to upset some people?
Because they're a nonprofit, it was really part of the communications department. So really it was more public outreach. So for us, it was just communicating our science to the public and providing information. And so for us, it was, just getting, it was almost just marketing. There was no need for return other than, are you putting out really good stuff? Do people like it? So I think now that we've built something pretty big, they would like to see what else they can do with it. But yeah, it was more of just communications, public outreach. Let's provide more value.
And that seems to be probably the most effective type of podcast for most small businesses. Yeah. I mean, it can be marketing as the overall emphasis that they want to get out of it, but they have to have more to the content than just talking about, hey, here we are, this is what we do. It needs to be, have some substance in the content. And for the most part, what I've ran into is education. Again, like you were talking about, educating your audience a little bit more on your industry, what it is that you do and what the benefits are from just doing it, not necessarily with your brand or product or service. And then some other things is entertainment. I've seen a lot of them have these quirky teams that work well together. And so they will jump on and record some of their antics and things they're talking about when they're having fun doing their job for a client or for a specific project. And those seem to be fun to listen to because it sounds like they're having a great time.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to adding a podcast to your business, if you have a business and you think, oh, I might want to get into this, it's probably best to invest in someone to take over as opposed to giving it to someone as a side job, saying, hey, work this into your 40 hours a week, this podcasting thing, whatever. So if you can do that, I think ideally that's the best, but it's not always the case. How do you measure the ROI, if you want to get all marketing speak, on a podcast for your business if it's not really bringing in revenue, right? I mean, if you haven't, I would say with my organization, it was an experiment and it worked out because we put out good content and people responded to it, and that was enough. But for a business that's making money, or even a small business, it can be a big, either you're hiring someone to do it, which is a big cost, or you're taking away 15 hours, 10 hours, whatever it takes a week for someone else to do it. How do you measure if that's worth it?
Well, I would say probably, what's the direct impact? What audience can you get it to immediately? Because one of the challenges for a small business is if you're really going to explore podcasting, I wouldn't necessarily jump into podcasting without an existing audience. You would want to podcast and tell either your current customers or your prospects that, hey, we have a podcast. This is what we're talking about. So you essentially market that podcast ahead of time. You kind of pre-sell the idea that you're going to do this. And so then you can start getting feedback on the idea and on the content that you're giving out. So your initial ROI or any indication that this is going to be effective is simply the feedback that you get. Now, as you go, that can transition into, subscribers and listeners, et cetera. But that's kind of where I would start.
Yeah, and I think one of the dangerous things for a business is that separate. You talked about, and John was saying in the chat that he agrees with the need for substance. And I think brands are really scared. Like, we have to make sure that our brand, keep saying the brand or keep selling this product, or every episode needs to convert something. I need a sale, right? But I really try to pitch them on the idea that, and I don't know if a lot of businesses understand that it's really this long game, as they say, right? You're really making an investment. You're providing more value, maybe to your other content or other services, and that you're trying to, make a bigger connection with your audience, or maybe you're trying to reach a new audience and bring them in. But it's not going to happen over your first 5 episodes, and they're going to see, like you said, I think you want to have that audience. So if you have a big email list, I would imagine, or whatever way you have to connect with that audience, once you start it, really push it out. But, I think you had a video, something about being cautious about being over optimistic or your expectations or something. I don't even know what that was about, but what was that about?
Okay, so you're talking about kind of that illusion of being the business owner, that there is an audience out there that wants to listen to you or buy your products or use your service or anything. And yes, that's the illusion of demand. And a lot of times when small business owners get a great idea, or maybe you want to start a business, you talk to a few people, you get encouragement or lack of encouragement. But what happens is you put a lot of time and effort and money into creating something that you really just you truly do not know if there's somebody out there who is interested in consuming the content you're creating or buying your product. So, I mean, when it comes to podcasting for small business specifically, and I'll tell you where I came from for wanting to start my own podcast. It was essentially, I'm living in an area where nobody knows my name. We moved to this area because my wife's from this area, brought my business along with it. And,
where's that at?
I'm Northern Indiana, Michiana is what it's called.
Congrats on the World Series, by the way. I heard
yes,
you were sort of pulling for the Cubs.
In the Chicago. See, we cheer for the South Bend Cubs, which is a minor league team that, scales up to Chicago. But
Gotcha.
anyways, I'm a business networker. So I go to these networking meetings and everything. And where I had such a influence where I came from before, people knew me, they knew my company, they knew what we did. That was all gone here. I'm literally starting from, ground zero and trying to build it all over again. And so I thought, what's the best way that I can go about giving value, just giving. And I found many mediums to do that. And podcasting was probably podcasting was the number one reason why I got into that. And the other things just kind of came by way of starting the podcast. And what happened because I had that podcast is people would do due diligence. They would check me out. They'd meet me somewhere, or my business would be referred to them. And so they would want to do some background checking on who is this guy? What is this business? Can I trust this person? And having that podcast there where they can go through an archive of that information brought the trust and credibility way up in their mind. And so that gave them a reason to then start talking about me and sharing the things that I talk about with others. And so that was a goal of mine, and it's worked effectively. So was I trying to sell anything as part of that? Not directly. And actually it was kind of this backward thought. I just wanted exposure and people to be familiar with who I am.
I just want to pause for a second and say that as we were chatting, Dave Weiner liked and retweeted a tweet of mine. Just saying, it's Dave Weiner, started. I did say thank you, Dave, because he posted an article about how podcasting really started, which I retweeted. So it was kind of it was low hanging fruit, but yeah, that's an awesome moment when the guy who created podcasting liked your tweet. So now I'm all off track. But hey, you say small business, but does that mean local, or it just means 2 employees? What is small business?
Okay, small business is often more a mentality than it is a size of a company. So, because you can have small businesses with 100+ employees. Budget's not a factor either, but small business is mostly what some people would call holistic business, meaning these guys might not have a degree in what they do, but they have a passion to do it. They have an audience or a market that they do this work in or provide this product to, and they are known probably locally for that one thing that they do. I mean, the list can be very long for those things, like landscaping, auto repair, just a couple there.
Right. I'm really interested in local business and podcasting in that intersection. And I'm wondering, is it a good move for a local business? Someone that you basically were trying to get business for people to walk through your door. And it's in your city. I'm not saying you have like a chain of stores nationally. It's really like, you're in Chicago, Illinois, and that would even be a big city. I mean, I'm talking smaller than that, right? Is there a place for small or local businesses to have a podcast? I mean, is that even a smart way to spend your time?
I think there can be, because, you look at what are the basic benefits of a podcast: relationship, connection, loyalty building, things that are incredibly valuable to any business. Now, for a local business, if they have a podcast, let's say it's some podcast that happens to have a national appeal.
Right. Well, let's take the local plumber.
Okay. Yeah. Local plumber has a plumbing podcast. And so that, national appeal, international appeal. Now, anyone who is in the area, I think, or if they know anyone in the area, they'd say, oh, you got to check out this plumber. I think this is the plumber you should talk to, because he's just a really cool guy. I've gotten to know him. I trust him, and all of that stuff that comes from a podcast. I think that for marketing yourself locally, I'm not so sure a podcast could help with that.
What do you mean marketing yourself locally? You mean the business locally?
Well, like, does it really help if I'm a plumber?
Right.
Does it really help me in marketing myself in my area if I have a podcast? Maybe. Now, maybe even looking at the more visual side of things, that might help more.
I'm thinking too, like, if you're a plumber and you have a YouTube channel and maybe also a podcast or just a podcast, it's like a value add, right? Or if someone's, you could, when you do a call and you go out and you could tell that person, hey, I have a show that would help you with this problem, right? Or something. I mean, if it's something you can give to your customers that then can share and say, hey, this guy, he fixed the toilet, and then he has a whole YouTube channel about tips of how to make sure that doesn't happen again, or something that was super simple that he doesn't actually need to call me for, what I mean? And then they share that, and then people, it's counterintuitive. They think, well, you're going to give the business away. They're not going to call you because you just gave them the tips. I don't think it works like that. I think you're just going to get more business because of it.
Yeah. And if you're in that industry that people don't need you very often, I think that's a very hard industry to really make a business out of producing ongoing content. In the podcast, so since I have a podcast about podcasting, that's something that people like to stay connected with, because they're constantly looking for ways to improve their podcast and that kind of thing. But if I was a plumber, people aren't normally thinking, boy, I want to listen to a podcast about how I can keep my pipes from clogging. I want to listen to this podcast episode after episode. That's kind of the more how-to stuff that people search for on YouTube. Eric was pointing this out in the chat as well. But then again,
I think I'm using them interchange. Like you could just be a YouTube channel, right? I mean, which you could then deliver as a podcast if you wanted to. But if you had a YouTube channel where people either found you through search, and I guess you could do local advertising against that, right? There is geo-targeted advertising for this kind of stuff on Facebook, right?
Absolutely.
Do you do any of that, Chris?
Yes.
We'll get back to that. Daniel, what? The reason what?
Oh, the reason I see YouTube as actually a different beast in all of this is because people do search YouTube. It is a search engine. for many people, and it shows up prominently in search engines. And they'll search either directly on YouTube or find something on YouTube looking for one thing and only one thing, and then they leave. That doesn't really happen in the podcasting space. People don't search for episodes in the podcasting space. Like, I want an episode about such and such. They don't really do that. Now, they might find that if you have really good show notes and search engine optimization on your site, and that works really well for me and for other podcasters.
Yeah,
but there is that different nature.
Google needs to do that. Like, there's no reason the way they used to search results used to push up a video. They need to start they have Google Play Store, whatever they call it. They need to push up podcast episodes, and obviously they need the help of podcasters. Your show notes have to be good in order to index something like that. But they could really push their store and listening in their store if they would give more weight, which I don't know why you wouldn't, because podcast is an extra threshold of work, right? I mean, you don't just, I could write a blog post, but it's going to take me more time to probably turn that into a podcast, especially if you have repeated episodes over time, you could rank better. So I think that could help them. It could help us, but because it's unfortunate that people can't search and then get the answer in a podcast. But hopefully that's the future. Google, you can bring me in and I'll tell you what you need to do. Chris, what were you going to say? You do advertising for businesses on like Facebook and stuff and social. Do you ever does that ever happen with the podcast that they have?
No, but I think that's an excellent idea. The challenge is that here's the convenience with video. So video can play with the sound turned off, especially like in Facebook. And going through the Facebook feed, you're going to see a number of videos that are already playing, but they're silenced until you turn that sound on. Now with podcast, you do the same thing with the podcast. No one's even going to know that there's a podcast there because they can't hear it. So that's the first challenge. You could, I guess, make one of Daniel's fake podcasts and put a picture to it. But
Chris has been watching the Roundtable.
Yes.
He just showed his Roundtable cred right there.
So anyways, that's the challenge. But going back to the topic of small business and having a podcast and talking about the how-tos, that wouldn't fly, because in small business marketing, most of your customers do not care about how you do your work. They just want you to get it done. They want you to do it right. They want to have confidence that you're the person who can do it. Now, in that area, you could probably do some entertainment or have conversations about different, I guess, storytelling, essentially, about projects that you've done. If we're talking about the plumber again, these things people will tune into, because especially if it's local, they might have seen it. They might know the names of the people that you're talking to. And those all become referral partners. I mean, the people that you're bringing on a show to talk about their project, they're going to go out there and say, hey, I was on this plumber show talking about the big project we've got going on. Because, for the most part, plumbers do that daily stuff, that routine of fixing your toilet or fixing the garbage disposal. But a lot of times they're in new project builds. They might be building, irrigation for a new construction of a building or a home or something along that lines. And people want to know what's going on. So if that plumber's, in a lot of those projects, it's a reason to tune in. Now, the plumbing clients that I have, are funny guys, and they really enjoy their stuff, and they know it very well.
Wait, you have plumbing clients?
Oh yes,
I picked a thing that's real. That's awesome.
Yes,
no
yes.
offense, plumbers, but that was random, so that's awesome.
I'll tell you, plumbing's a great industry to be in. Those guys are always busy. Yeah,
I mean, I know a guy who does it. And he makes great money. So, you're doing digital marketing for for like a local plumber?
Oh yes,
what's the number one thing you're doing with that type of client, with that type of business, local, small, almost door to door? What's the most effective for them, just to get off track here?
Right now, it's probably video, them showing a little bit of what they're doing. And it really depends on who the client is too, because not everybody's comfortable with doing video or doing audio.
Right. I mean, in having that podcast or video, I mean, part of that if it doesn't bring someone in through the door, but it does lend credibility or confidence in a customer if they can go look you up and see, oh, he really knows what he's talking about. Guess what? He's also nice. I'm going to let this person in my home. Like
Exactly.
I go to website. I mean, I've hired plenty of local contractors, and if I go to your website and you don't have pictures of your projects, it's over. Like I need to, I've seen the worst websites, but I want to see some proof because you don't know. I mean, like getting a contractor is like dating. You're just like, hey, do you want to come over and give me a bid? Cool.
It can be scary.
Yeah, I mean, like you don't know who you're inviting to your home, so having a little bit more to go on, I think I would imagine would help. Now, I mean, there is this how much I'm a plumber. I don't have time to be creating content. Or where's that divide? Where is it too much time spent creating content, not enough time doing either? Do I take one less job to create content? Like, where do I make that cut?
I think, especially in the plumber scenario, they could hook a mic up and just have an audio recorder, and they're, deep underground in a hole somewhere and talking about what they're doing right there at that moment and hearing
plumbing
the background.
Tales.
Exactly.
Is there any value to? Yeah, there may be some value into because I mean, what other plumbers listening to a plumbing podcast? We've really gone down the plumbing well.
Well, I don't think, because it's not a how-to, because like I said, the audience who needs your services doesn't care how you do it. They just want you to do it and do it well and make their pain go away. And if it warms them up to you to entertain them and tell them a little bit more about who you are and the experiences that you get into, that really sells the idea of choosing you as a plumber.
Hey, I just want to say, Harry in the chat, podcast junkies, Harry.
Switch to text.
He's going to create Tinder for plumbers called Plunder. Now, I don't know if it's a way to find other plumbers or what, but Harry, good luck with that. I'll install it in my burner phone or something, and I'll swipe left on Harry. Is white left? Or I don't even know which way to swipe.
Plumbers actually have a hard time finding other plumbers to work. They go through a lot of turnover.
I guess, if you have a plumbing business, you do probably work with a lot of subcontractors, right? Or have other guys that you need to work with you.
Yeah, master plumbers who have a plumbing license, they'll have people work under their license. But yeah, for tax accountant, actually, I know of some financial firms that do have podcasts, and there's one here locally that does it. And they actually have a radio show on the local radio station that they then record down or upload and make it a podcast.
So what's the real value? I mean, is that a business that requires people to come through the door to do the tax, or do they do stuff online as well? Like, where's the real value for them?
It's more financial planning. I will say that most CPAs that I know probably aren't interested in doing more marketing. But for financial planning, yes, they put out so much just quick pieces to answer a lot of the common questions that they get. And I mean, it's the whole reason why I did my podcast too, is I just wanted to answer a lot of the most common questions that come up when I get a phone call or I get an email. They did the same thing. And that seems to be a good answer.
I mean, that's great. Just now you're saving time, right? Like if the repeatable things that we have to serve to people, you could say, go check out this. I've answered that question. And I think it's better than like, just in an email. I mean, it's more interactive in terms of, it's a little bit, feels like more value.
I would add, the podcast scales. Emails, while I can create templates, I still have to personalize those. I can't personalize the podcast, but let's say I want to refer to that podcast in an email. Now I've made it specific to them. And it's not just an email, it's also an audio clip that goes into much more detail than I can in an email.
Any real estate agents in your group there? Eric Timmer in the chat says real estate, which I'm thinking, I don't know how many real estate agents have a podcast. I feel like there's so many real estate agents in every city. Could one is there an advantage of like, you could still get in early and be the real estate agent then?
Maybe not for the agent per se, unless it's not so much about buying and selling. I mean, you can do that, but I would say making it more about the community and just getting your name out there and getting the exposure. Now that also you have to factor in, is it commercial real estate? Is it residential real estate? Or is it, is it an investor? Those sorts of things. But for your normal real estate agent, I can see if you're wanting to get people just to be familiar with who you are, your voice, your face, so that they come to you when they have real estate questions.
Yeah,
that might work well.
And I'm thinking about something that, with real estate agents or whatever industry you're in, sometimes being known in the industry is important. I feel like real estate agents, like, networking is sort of a thing. I don't know if it's completely solo or it's good. So a big conference. What if you want to speak at a conference? It certainly wouldn't hurt to have this proof of, hey, I do a show every week, right? I can speak at your conference, and there's probably a lot of value to that.
Well, I would say if you're a real estate agent and you're going to a real estate conference, you're probably not going to get the listeners you want unless you want to be seen as that real estate expert. But if you're looking to get people to buy and sell with you locally, then yeah, you need to go to the venues, the conferences where you're going to network, get the referral business.
Right. And I'm thinking outside of income now at this point. Now you're establishing yourself as a leader in the industry.
An authority, reputation building, influence.
Which we all do. Right?
Yeah, all of that stuff that really matters more than dollars.
But hard to talk a business into. I don't know. I don't deal with a lot of businesses. Is it hard to sell a business on that? No, there might not be direct income that you'll see weekly from this, but here are all the other intangibles.
It's probably the best way to sell your business, and the idea of working with you is because most people will get caught up on that direct sale. Sales is always the hardest thing, but you can start relationships just by talking to people, getting to know them. They see you, they get to interact with you over time. They see the podcast and anything else that you do. And now you're really doing the true networking. Is they know who you are. They appreciate who you are and what you know and what you can provide to them, but also to everybody else they know. They can refer business to you. And that in essence is, that's referral networking. And that's a good thing for small business. And a podcast can add credibility there. Hey, I've got a podcast. Check it out.
Daniel, what do you think? What do you think of podcasting as part of your business? How else do you integrate the podcast with your business? I mean, it all has so much crossover because of probably your niche.
For me personally, or I guess, go ahead, Daniel. I'm sorry.
That's good. Well, with me, my business exists because of my podcast. My business could not exist without the podcast. If I stopped the audacity to podcast, yes, I would still have residual income, but it would start going down because my name would not be out there as much. My reputation would start to fade. People would start to forget about me. Although I have things that have residual income, I would then be relying completely on those things and not bringing new people, not building an audience, not continuing to build authority and trust. I mean, there's someone out there that Ray and I have shared the stage with that has disappeared. I have no idea if they're still making money from their podcast anymore. They've disappeared. They don't host the podcast they used to host anymore. You know who I'm thinking of, Ray?
I think so. I mean, I do, because I wondered myself. I mean, but that happens a lot in the podcast about podcasting space.
Well, and so for me, the way I see it is the audacity to podcast is not a monetization thing. I don't directly monetize. Well, there are ways it is kind of monetized, like with affiliates. But the audacity to podcast for me is a reputation building thing. It's really advertising. It's sponsored content. That's the better way to look at it. Basically, it's sponsored content. It's valuable content sponsored by me and whatever product or service that I'm selling, and or my business as a whole. It builds my authority, my reputation. It builds relationships, connections, loyalty, so that when I have something to sell, people buy.
So take notes when you're trying to sell your boss on a podcast. These are the things you'll need to elaborate more, but these are the things you want to list, right? Because I know that can, even in this day and age when podcasting it has a lot of buzz around it. There's a lot of articles in the last year about podcasting, and more people are saying, what is this podcasting thing? Should we do this? You know, if someone opens that door, if I was working somewhere, I know I want to be a podcast producer. I'd be like, oh yeah, you should definitely do that. And here's the reasons, right? And I'm not going to be able to I'm not gonna be able to tell you there's going to be, you know, money coming through the door because of it, but it's all this other stuff, which I think any smart business person realizes is important. And even brand building. I mean, it's really putting you out there in another space. You know, I mean, if, you know, in the case of, you always hear with Coke and Pepsi, they're not going to necessarily sell you another Coke so much as they just want to keep their name in front of you all the time.
That goes a long way to say that. Actually, I was going to share something with you guys I didn't think of. And of course, I've got the wrong thing. But I use the podcast as a way to get my foot in the door, to be honest. As a business owner, I'm the number one salesman. I'm the face of the company. And any opportunity that I have to help another small business owner, I'll take it. I will have a conversation, or I will mostly just listen and then provide value. And so I've actually had very nice professional business cards made that just say chrisrisse.com on them. And it's literally, go check out the podcast, go listen. I talk about this, and I will give them a little bit of a brief introduction into that. And then from that point on, you know, I'm just watching my inbox for new subscriber.
Cool logo, by the way. Did you design that, or did you have someone do that?
I did it.
Oh, nice. Is that a hobby? You do digital marketing, but you also do graphics and stuff?
Well, as the owner, most of what we do is based upon the talents and skills that I've developed, the education that I have. And then for me, it's I don't want to do this anymore. I need to have somebody else do it, because I need to focus on what it is that the business needs most. And that's usually new business. So yes, I have designers who work for me, developers, etc. But yes, I've acquired those skills over the years.
Now, if you're watching the video, you can see behind Chris. I want to know about more hobbies. I'm really derailing it here. Are those Legos in the back?
Yes, those are Lego buildings. That's right.
Quite
there.
A town there.
I've got pirate ships up on the wall too.
Nice. So when is it Talk Like a Pirate Day?
Oh,
when is that?
September 19th.
We had that on the Roundtable one time.
Okay, that was not that long ago. I was going to say I can zoom out a little bit and you can see a little bit more.
Oh yeah, they kind of put the camera on. So this is
everything in his room is awesome.
If you're still listening or watching, you know, go check out the video version. We always have to have a reason to go check out the video. No, not like I have to get you there. I don't even here's the thing. I don't even monetize the video. I have a YouTube channel. I do monetize my YouTube channel, but the roundtables, there's no ads on them at all. So
you should promote with our beautiful faces. Go see us actually in person. Well,
yes,
via video.
Via video. Awesome. And Daniel looking good there with your new acoustic panels. They light up. It's very blue.
And change colors too.
Oh, yeah.
You know, talking about this from the perspective of a customer, there's a podcast I listen to called The Membership Guys. I met Mike Morrison at Podcast Movement 2016. Someone said, oh, you should meet this guy, because I run a membership site, Podcaster Society for podcasters, and I want to learn how I can improve that site as well. I'm not going to build it all on my own knowledge. I want to learn more about it. So I started listening to the Membership Guys podcast, really appreciating the value he was putting out. Now, here's the thing. Mike Morrison and the Membership Guys podcast is not the only podcast about memberships. It's not the first podcast about memberships. Mike Morrison did not create the idea of running your own membership site. I would say he's not even the one or the couple people really known to own that industry of creating your own membership site. The people who are known for that, to me, feel a bit more, words don't go all the way across the page, if you know what I mean, which is a very meta statement. But they seem a bit spammy to me. Whereas Mike Morrison, very friendly, very personable. He's got a lovely British accent too, which always helps. And he presents valuable information, and I felt like he was giving so much value, and by that, he convinced me I got to join his membership site academy and become a customer of his, because he's providing so much value here. He's telling about all of this other value he offers in this thing that he sells. Now, that's one of those things, though, again, that goes back to an ongoing relationship with the podcast led to business.
I think kind of a word you skipped over there, but we're alluding to, is community, and how how each individual, I guess, gives value and organizes their community. And from a small business perspective, your community is often local, but that's changing. I mean, our company has clients all over the country, and there are people that we do business with that I've never met in person, and it's quite exciting actually to be able to do that. But for the most part, they're not the major part of the community. The community is local, and who is local? Everyone's local that lives around it. My neighbors, the mayor's office, the fire department, the coffee shop down on the square. Those are the people that you want to know that you exist locally. And while they might not be able to use your services directly or buy your products directly, they're oftentimes going to know people who can. And if they're aware of you and trust you, they're going to refer you to those who they do know who can buy your products and services.
Yeah, awesome points. What else? Daniel changed his background to green, which I think actually looks pretty good there.
Matches his shirt.
Matches his shirt. So he can color coordinate his studio. Actually, I think the green actually is a great look. You should keep that. You got to check this out, you guys.
Yeah, YouTube. Someone had said earlier, the blue background is clashing with Daniel's green shirt. So I thought, well, I'll change the background to green.
Awesome. So when it comes to, we don't have to keep going on podcasting as part of your business. I guess, again.
Well, we can talk a little bit more about community because I see where there's where we can compare most of what you would describe as getting subscribers and building an email list. While those things are important locally for a small business, it's more about just building a list in general. And that list isn't always just email addresses or people going to your website and subscribing to a podcast. Oftentimes it's, building just simply a contact list of somebody's name, where they're at, maybe their phone number, maybe an email address. And one of the things that I like to talk about is the one list rule. What can be confusing is having a mailing list over in your email newsletter service, and then having a Twitter following and everybody who subscribes to your podcast or follows you on YouTube, whatever that might be. And so they try to organize all of these different things when it's really ultimately trying to get them into one list that then you can share everything else that you have.
I think community is really that key word. If you have a business and you want your podcast to go along with that business, you have to think of starting a community. Because if you focus on that as your goal with the podcast, then I think you'll make a lot better of a podcast that will help your business a lot more than if you try and start a podcast in order to market your business.
I don't know if you have to start a community. It's more of you need to find your place in a community and then establish yourself as an authority.
Right. I'm not saying that's what you need to do, but I think that's the perspective you should have, is that by starting this podcast, you are, in a sense, starting a community, because the goals of a community are much different than the goals of an advertisement.
Maybe. What if you're advertising to grow your community just for the awareness? Just for the exposure to say, hey, we exist. So, because what I'm trying to do is try to relate the small business community to the wide-reaching virtual community. They're very, very similar, but how you go about doing it is oftentimes a little bit different, because you guys talk about call to action a lot. And what is that call to action that should be done? Is it subscribe? Is it follow us on Twitter? Is it go to our website and sign up for the email newsletter? And these are just examples. Those same things are available to small business, But oftentimes they can actually go meet people in person. They can pick up the phone and have a conversation if they're willing to talk to somebody on the other end. So, I mean, how do you guys see that? Have you ever picked up the phone and called somebody that's a subscriber that you could say is part of your community?
Yeah, I mean, I've called back or text message, whatever. I like text messages, but I have reached out in a more personal way before. I mean, usually it's someone asking for help or something, and they expect an email or something. But I'll definitely call. You know, if podcaster comes through town, I've met a couple in person to go have a beer or something, right?
And
or
that's
you go to another
awesome.
city. You go to another city and that's nice thing. You know, one of the beautiful things about podcasting is you start a show, you start to have friends in other cities. And then when you travel those cities, you have a friend there. And whether that's, you know, me going to the UK and just being able to get a personal tour of London from Mike Russell, or it's, hey, I actually need a place to crash in Chicago. Do you have an extra room? You know, whatever it is. So, you know, that is a really cool benefit is, you know, and I mean, you take that many places, I guess, but just knowing you're able to reach into other, I was gonna say community, but I'm drowning in the. I got lost like 3 communities ago, and so I was trying to switch up the adjective. But, yeah, I mean, just being able to again reach into other geographical places and meet people. I think podcasting lends that unique opportunity.
You know, and talking again. Sorry, we'll go back to the second or third community. In the chat room, Sean McCabe from the Sean West community said, been listening to since the beginning. Great show, guys. Had to chime in. Our podcast has been the biggest source of members for our community, paid membership site with about 700 members. This works well because we have never monetized with sponsors, so the listeners feel a desire to reciprocate and support us. And I think in there is something that more recently has, as a podcast consumer, really, really frustrated me. There are a couple podcasts I listen to where the podcasters have something to sell and their podcasts have started having sponsors. And it bugs me because I feel like you're better than that. You don't need a sponsor because you have something to sell. Why are you doing a sponsor? It's degrading your message of what you have to sell and what you have to offer and the greater value you have that way. Now, I can understand there can be many business reasons to take a sponsor and such, but it's one of the reasons that I stopped taking sponsors for the Audacity to Podcast. And I think the last sponsor I had was only because I knew I could tie it into content. But it needs to be all about what's the most value you can bring. And sometimes that is your own thing instead of diluting your message with someone else's call to action.
Right. You'll see this with Patreon where people have a sponsor and they say, hey, if we reach this level, we can cut out the sponsorships. Right. And I mean, like, I love that model and being community supported. I love that level because, again, it allows you to, well, now you're not catering to another audience, which is your sponsor. So, you know, I mean, if you have a product, I mean, maybe it's tough. You know, selling is tough, right? And it may be easier sometimes to like, oh, we have a sponsor, or maybe having a sponsor on some level also feels like it adds credibility. Like someone had believed in us enough to pay us to be on our show. It probably depends on the niche you're in, but yeah, I mean, I love the community supported model. It allows you to cut out a sponsor if you get enough of that. But, you know, I think because we've talked about it before, and a lot of people they have a hard time pitching even their own products. I think they have a hard time pitching those to their audience. So I don't know if any of that comes into play there, but it can be hard to do.
That is often a challenge for small business owners. And so I look at individual podcasters kind of in the same way. They if they're wanting to run their podcast as a small business, accepting sponsors, as Daniel said, does dilute what it is you're trying to say, because now you've got a mixed message. What is it that you're trying to accomplish with that podcast? Is it getting your voice across and your message across that your community can value, or are you really trying to push that product? And I guess the challenge then is, how do you support a podcast if it doesn't directly impact your bottom line? Some of the things that I see is podcasts will last for a little while and then they'll stop, and then they'll podcast again for a little while and then they'll stop. And really it's because in most small businesses, they just get busy. That podcast did its job because they set a goal to do it. And oftentimes it's not a sponsor. The sponsor is the business that they're podcasting within. And when they finally do, I guess, get the podcasting through, they've had the show's gone on for a while, their focus is now on accomplishing the new business that they've gained from it. And what they'll stop podcasting for a while and get back into it once they're through the new business. They've accommodated all the new customers and clients. So, it's one of those things. It's a roller coaster. You need to figure out where's that happy medium of, we can podcast this much because this is what our community wants, and this is what we can afford to do, and not being turned on and off so much.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, we're about at an hour. I always say that, and I'm like, I always tell people how much I hate when that happens on a podcast. I was like, no, why are you? The producer's coming. They're going to turn off the. I have to give up the studio space. I rent this out. That actually is my business. No, not at all. Wouldn't do that. I have to I steal all of Daniel's panels. Daniel's just starting a new business. He's going to build panels for you. This has been his whole day. I mean, like, $50 a pop, you're good. But
yeah, isn't that 100% markup?
Yeah, it should be.
That's like negative 100% markup.
Awesome. Well, you guys, thank you so much. I mean, if you have any last thoughts, feel free to share them. But let us know where we can find your show. Thanks for Sean McCabe, who he said he'd been here the whole time, but now he's chatting, so we know he's out there. If you want to attend a live round, we're pretty much here every 2 weeks. For now, it's Thursday, every 2 weeks, 4:30 Pacific. But sign up to the list, podcastersroundtable.com/guest. You'll get announcements when we're going to go live, and you can also join us. So make sure you do that. John in the chat room, lots of good stuff there. John Moore, Harry, Podcast Junkies. That's a fun podcast about podcasting. If you are into this show, you probably will like that. Eric, Stargate, Pioneer SP on the show. Thank you guys so much. But let us know where we can find your podcast. Chris, obviously, you talk about this stuff. Chris does YouTube videos in his car, which are fun.
Yes.
And that may have something to do with having 2 kids. I don't know. Or maybe that's just the brand. It's like Traffic Stop.
Well,
Talks.
As a small business owner, it's about taking breaks. And that's why the Thursday stop is in the car in the middle of nowhere. It's because I'm out of the office and no one's going to bother me. That's the point of it. And kind of what I'm trying to teach other small business owners. Sometimes you got to get out.
What camera and microphone are you using to do that? Now, since I'm a nerd that way, I like to know.
Okay.
It sounds good.
Well,
the sound looks good.
I've experimented quite a bit, and that's actually my cell phone. Now, nice. I've taken a break from doing that because I've talked about turning the podcast on and even the videos, doing it, and I use it more as an archive that I can refer to. And I can say a lot more about that, but I actually just got one of the Rode Video Mic Me's, the little boom, and it fits right on there. And that's worked really well. So well, in fact, that I'm using it as part of my business networking, recording speakers, and it gets right up there and they can talk and be heard. It's
a killer mic. It's specifically made for smartphones. It's got the TRS connection, and we have a little gimbal at work, and I shot some stuff. It's a smartphone gimbal. Put the Rode mic on it, did some Facebook Lives. It was amazing. I was surprised. I mean, you want to be close enough, but it does a good job. So if you definitely look into the Rode Video Mic Me if you have a phone, and just a small thing to make that audio a little bit better. And in a car is a good space because it'll keep that sound sort of directed, and it can be a little dampened. So anyways, always have to ask about gear, because if you're watching this far, you like the gear too. So
I can tell you a little bit more. Because actually, for those who are watching, I got a lot of my info from Ray on a lot of this setup. So
nice.
This is a AT2020 that I'm speaking into, the H4N over here that it's going into. So
nice. Yeah, it's so funny because he's been doing it for a while, because that's older gear. Like, I wouldn't even put you on that gear these days. So it's always important. I always tell people, make sure you ask before you buy, because every setup is different. Like you say, you're doing it in your car with your phone, right? And this can be as easy as, just to relate it back to podcasting. It can be that easy on a phone with a simple little mic that plugs in. Now you're getting good audio to the video track that you can then literally, he could sit there in the middle of nowhere and upload it to YouTube, be driving home and answering comments, and he gets back because he's already got a bunch of comments. So
don't do that while driving.
No, not why. I say when you get home. That's very important.
But that's a great point, though, that you brought up. Is I've done it so that anybody could do it. I don't want to try to overwhelm people with a lot of that equipment. It needs to be simple if you want to get it done.
Yeah. And then we can have a whole roundtable. We will have a whole roundtable about simple versus good versus quality versus the whole thing, and maybe how to achieve all of that without going crazy with some of the stuff that we tend to deep dive into. But Eric says party at Ray's garage. But yeah, Daniel, bring your panels. It'll be a good time. Chris, where do we find your podcast?
ChrisRisse.com, plain and simple. Go there, click on podcast, and you can listen.
Very cool. Thanks for joining us. His first roundtable. So very small roundtable, but we had a new roundtabler, so we're good. Daniel J. Lewis, thanks for joining as always.
Thank you. You can find me at theaudacitytopodcast.com. And a podcast can be a great thing for your business. And if you're looking to improve yours, well, go to theaudacitytopodcast.com and learn more.
Awesome. All right. Check out podcastroundtable.com. Sign up. We'll get you on a roundtable. Be patient. We'll get there. Still pulling in the occasional 2013er, 14er. Got to hit the 15s, but we'll get you on. And we will see you for round 82 in 2 weeks. Wave goodbye. See ya.